Well, hello there. Welcome to the Jaggy Thistle podcast. Kenny Farquharson here, talking to you about Scottish politics and Scottish culture. That's what we do here on the Jaggy Thistle. If you're new to this, let me just introduce myself. I'm a journalist on the Times newspaper. I've been writing about Scottish politics and all its wonderful complexity and wondrous glory for about 30 years now, writing about Scotland more generally as well. And I'm taking that insight and taking that experience and distilling it into these podcasts for you as we run up to the Holyrood elections on May the 7th. I also do a Substack newsletter, which is available to you if you just Google Substack and find the Jaggy Thistle on Substack. You'll find a newsletter there that I put out to thousands of subscribers about the wondrous complexities of this nation of ours and the wider world from a Scottish point of view as well. So if you think that's something you might like, give us a go, the Jaggy Thistle there. Also, if you're new to this, please subscribe to this channel wherever you're watching this or listening to this, whether it's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or on the Substack app itself, either desktop or mobile. Please subscribe so you don't miss any more of these podcasts in the future. Give you a sense of what we're going to be, what's coming up on the Jaggy Thistle. I've got a post coming in the next few days, which is on music, about a band that I've been increasingly obsessed with over the last few months. The lead singer for this band just published a book, published by Rough Trade Records, and I'm going to be talking about this band and this singer's book, which has made quite a profound impression on me. And the band, I actually went to see them last weekend, the weekend before, in Glasgow, and it was perfect for a middle-aged gentleman, elderly gentleman like myself, because they were the support band, and they went on at this extremely un-rock and roll time of 7:45, played for half an hour. I was back on the train to Edinburgh at 8:30, and I was tucked up in my bed by 10 o'clock. So the ideal rock and roll experience for the elderly gent. I can heartily recommend it. So I'll be writing about this band and this singer and his writing and his extraordinary personal family story in a podcast in the next few days. So as always, my email here on the Jaggy Thistle is thejaggythistle@substack.com. Please feel free to get in touch with your opinions on what I'm saying here and your thoughts generally about Scottish politics and Scottish culture. So as I said, this is the Friday the 27th of February in the morning. We are the morning after the Gorton and Denton by-election. Obviously, every other podcast in the land is going to be talking about this by-election. I'm going to let it kind of simmer for a little bit. I'm going to let it settle and marinate for a little bit till the full implications for Scotland come through. There will be implications for the Scottish Labour Party. There will be implications for the Holyrood election campaign. Let's see how things pan out over the next couple of days, and then we'll return to it and talk about them then. In the meantime, I want to just mark what is an extraordinary moment in Scottish politics, and particularly about the nationalist movement in Scotland. For me, this is a story that, although it's electorally not very important in terms of electoral politics, it is extremely important in understanding the last 5-10 years of Scottish political history, understanding the tensions and dynamics within Scotland's nationalist movement and independence movement. Extremely important in understanding of the demise of various political figures within the nationalist movement. I'm talking about the Alba Party. And the Alba Party, set up by Alex Salmond in 2021, in March 2021. And I just want to read you what he said at that launch. He said, Today, Alba are hoisting a flag in the wind, planting our saltire on a hill. In the next few weeks, we will see how many rally to our standard. And there was a question mark implicit in those words. And the answer was, well, not very many people are going to rally to the standard, frankly, Alex. And this weekend, we are really pondering the end of the Alba party. 5 years, less than 5 years from its launch, it now looks to be a spent political force. And Kenny MacAskill, the new leader of the Alba party, after the very sad death of Alex Salmond in 2024 at the young age of 69, no age at all, a very young age for a very tragic death. After Alex Salmond died, Kenny MacAskill became leader of Alba party. And he said a few days ago that the party may not be able to fight the Holyrood election on May 7 because it has no money. There's some alleged fraud within the party, he says. Police are investigating. There are no resources to allow the party to fight these elections, to register with the electoral authorities and to fight them on May the 7th. There are, it has to be said, a few Alba stalwarts, people like Tommy Sheridan, the former leader of the Scottish Socialist Party, and Angus Brendan McNeill, the former SNP MP for the Western Isles, two rather colourful characters, shall we say. They are, and along with Alex Salmond's niece, they have been saying that there is still hope for Alba to fight these elections, and so they are going to be pushing hard for Alba to survive as a political force, not least to pursue their own personal political careers. But if this is indeed the end of the Alba party, my gut reaction to that is to say goodbye and good riddance. And why do I take that kind of dismissive tone? It's because, this party, the Alba party, was never really a coherent and legitimate political project. Okay? It didn't come from a place of politics. It came from a place of personal animosity and a desire for personal vengeance. And this was never the basis for a political party that could have an appeal, a broad appeal to the Scottish electorate. So, why do I say this? It didn't really have to be this way, is the lesson I think that we can take from Alba's demise. It didn't have to be this way because nationalist movements around the world, and particularly places like Quebec, the Basque country, Catalonia, talking about stateless nations with their own distinct political identity. The politics in these places is very different to the politics of Scotland because there are a number, there could be 2 or 3 nationalist parties within these places. And that seems to be a natural state of affairs. And that a nationalist movement isn't just one huge umbrella party, but is split into other parties depending on where they stand on the right-left axis ideologically. If they're socialist in inclination or centre-right, whether they're social democratic or Christian Democrat, or further to the right on a more kind of populist insurgency within the nationalist movement of that country. These are often reflected in separate political parties in these stateless nations, and more broadly across Europe and North America as well. So, it's actually an anomaly for Scotland to have just one main nationalist party. And a little aside here, I'm not including the Greens here. I don't consider the Greens to be a nationalist party. I don't think supporting independence makes you a nationalist party. It's a different calculation. You may disagree with me. Please do. Please write to me and tell me why you disagree with me. But I'm kind of putting the Greens aside on this. So, there is obvious scope within nationalist politics for a range of parties. So Alba should have been able to work. There was room for a party that took a different view to the SNP leadership on a number of issues. And Alba did. If you look at what are often the differences between different nationalist parties elsewhere in the world, there's often a kind of liberal versus social conservative split. There's often a kind of right-left split, like I talked about. There's often a disagreement on the key issue of independence and the constitution between people who are pragmatists, who are cautious, who are incrementalists, and people who are impatient, hotheads, who are desperate for one more heave for independence and believe that the other people within the nationalist movement are dragging their feet. Those differences were all apparent and have been apparent within the SNP for a number of years before Alba was set up. There was, of course, the hugely divisive issue of trans rights reform, which scarred the SNP and scars it still. That produced that kind of progressives versus social conservatives division. There was the division between the gradualists and the fundamentalists on the issue of independence, with people believing that Nicola Sturgeon had dragged her feet and not been as aggressive and muscular enough on the issue of independence. So there were these obvious divisions, but they kind of were not as important in the creation of Alba as the big difference, which was, who did you side with in the great schism, the great civil war within the SNP? Did you side with Nicola Sturgeon, or did you side with Alex Salmond? And of course, what brought all this about, the core reason for this split, was the accusations of sexual misconduct levelled against Alex Salmond, which resulted in a court case, a criminal trial, in which he was acquitted of multiple charges of sexual misconduct against multiple women who'd come forward. As I say, Salmond was acquitted on all charges there, but the consequence of that case produced the schism within the nationalist movement that gave birth to the Alba Party. And I think the seeds of Alba's demise were sown in its genesis, because, as I say, I don't see this as a coherent, legitimate political party based on political ideology or political theory or any kind of foundation of coherent political thought. This was a party which was based on personal animus. It was a vehicle for Alex Salmond's personal revenge against Nicola Sturgeon, who he saw as leading a conspiracy to prevent him from ever gaining power in Scotland again. So this was personal animus, this personal thirst for revenge. And I think that just in itself explains why Alba has never really made an impression within the Scottish electorate, or even within the Scottish independence movement in the way that other parties that were similarly set up and similarly structured with similar policy views have been success elsewhere in the world. And if you look at, Alba's electoral success has been pitiful. In the 2021 Holyrood election, the last Holyrood election, Salmond's party only won 44,915 votes, okay, across the whole of Scotland. That's 1.66% of the tally, the national tally on the regional list vote, which is which is where Alba competed. The following year, in the local authority elections in Scotland, Alba did even worse. It only had 12,000 votes, first preference votes, in that election, which is just 0.7% of the Scottish popular vote. This is not a good record in electoral terms. So, why is that? Why did Alba fail? And I think the answer is pretty damn obvious. Alba failed because the general Scottish public, Mr. and Mrs. McAverage, took one look at Alba and saw right through it. They recognised it for what it was. They recognised it as a cult of the personality. They recognised it as a vehicle for personal revenge. And looking at the cult of the personality they saw was all too clear. They recognised who Alex Salmond was, because there was an Alex Salmond in every workplace. There was an Alex Salmond in every saloon bar. There was an Alex Salmond in some of their families, sadly. And it was what they recognised was that this man was a bully and a narcissist. And it seems clear to them, the Scottish voter looking at Alba, that why would you want to, get involved in what was basically a family feud, a family brawl, an internecine battle? And, what was in it for them to help this man pursue his vendetta of vengeance, is seeking vengeance from this woman who he saw as being behind a feminist conspiracy to destroy him? What was in it for the Scottish voter to get involved in this personal battle? And when you look at it from a distance, it becomes increasingly bizarre as to how this party could even hope to capture the imagination of the voter, because it's weird, frankly, to think that one man's personal animus against one woman could be scaled up into a national movement, a national political force that could challenge for power. It's bizarre. It only makes sense if that personal animus is so all-consuming that it blinds you to your normal political and strategic and tactical sense. And Salmond was an extraordinary political tactician. He had a very finely tuned mind when it came to tactics and strategy and communication and politics. One of the most gifted politicians of his generation, and I mean in UK terms, not just in Scottish terms. Extraordinarily gifted. But he was blind to the toxicity that he brought to this party. He could look at politics and see all the nuances, except when all the nuances were about him and about his personality, his persona, and his leadership. And I think it's often forgotten that when the people looked at Alex Salmond and the Alba party, they did not like what they saw, okay? And I'm not exaggerating here. In 2021, before the last Scottish Parliament elections, Survation polling had Alex Salmond as the least popular politician in Scotland by a long, long way. You know, we're talking about, I made a note of the numbers here. I think that poll, Alex Salmond's net popularity in that poll was minus 64 points, percentage points. It's hard. I mean, just put that in context. It was 20 points worse than the popularity of Boris Johnson among Scottish voters. And we know what Scottish voters made of Boris Johnson. And I think this is because people recognised it for what it was. They recognised Salmond for what it was. They recognised the purpose of the Alba party for what it was. Okay, and it was nothing to do with them. You know, it was nothing that had any use for them or could have any function for them within the context of the Scottish political battles. They took one look at it, frankly, and thought, I'm not getting involved in that. Which is a tragedy for, you know, some of the people who invested time and energy and political capital in Alba alongside Salmond, in the hope that it could be one of these parties like we see in other nationalist movements elsewhere in the world. People for whom the trans issue or the independence issue was a very personal and sincere part of their political makeup, and they were very impassioned about it, and they saw that they saw Alba as a great vehicle for that. Frankly, they were fooled. Okay, they were fooled into lending their energy and their passion and their support to this party. A party that never really had any core interest in pursuing those ideas. A party whose sole function was to wreak revenge on the mainstream SNP and to prove Alex Salmond's grand guignol conspiracy theory that he had been the victim of a grand conspiracy, the tendrils of which could be felt in every single aspect, every single part of the Scottish state. All these things had conspired against him: the police, the prosecution service, the judiciary, the SNP itself, the press. All these people, all these branches of the Scottish state and Scottish civic life had conspired against him. And when you talk about it in those terms, it sounds weird and it sounds bizarre, and it was. And it only makes sense if you are Alex Salmond with a huge opinion of yourself. And if you, Alex Salmond, with this great opinion of yourself, have been brought low, then what brought you low must be a huge and grand conspiracy, because otherwise it doesn't make sense. Because how could such a towering figure have been brought to this, if not through a towering conspiracy? So that, for me, explains why Alba now is on the brink of extinction as a political party. And as I say, it's very sad. I'm very sad for the people who put a lot of time and faith and political capital into it, and who are now looking at the ashes of that capital. I do not think this is necessarily the end for an alternative nationalist party in Scotland. I still think there's scope for 1, 2, 3 more parties, and why not? We have an electoral system in Scotland, in the Holyrood election system, which is flawed. regular readers and viewers or listeners of this podcast will know that I believe it's fundamentally flawed, but it does provide a possibility for people to gain parliamentary representation with just 6, 7, 8% of the vote. So there's obviously potential there for the breadth and the breadth within the nationalist movement, which, remember, covers half of Scotland, okay, half of Scottish opinion. There's enough variety within that to be reflected in a number of parties with different focuses and different motivations. But that party is not going to be Alba. And, there is room for such a party, but one surely predicated on a nation's hopes rather than one man's hate. And that's all I've got to say about that today. If you want to send me a message commenting on that, you may disagree. I'm no doubt there'll be some who disagree vehemently. Let me know in the comments or email me on the Jaggy Thistle at substack.com. Please check out what we're doing on the Jaggy Thistle more broadly. Still very gratified by the very positive response to the words and pictures I did about the Keith Folk Festival in a piece called One Handful of Earth, which was a rumination, it became a rumination on ideas of home and belonging and national identity, Scottish national identity, and the Scots language, and ideas of place and materiality and ethnography. It's a piece that grew arms and legs as it went on. So I'm very gratified by a very positive response to that. If you haven't read it, please check it out on the Jaggy Thistle webpage. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your time and attention. I'll see you next time.